In 1603, Elizabeth I of England died without an heir, making the Tudor dynasty extinct. Her crown was passed on to James VI of Scotland, the son of her cousin, Queen Mary of Scots. He later became known as James I of England. James I was the first of a series of Stuart absolutists who believed in the theory of divine rights, that the king was chosen by God and should have absolute power over the realm without input from representative bodies or factions.
The state of monarchy is the supremest thing upon earth, for kings are not only God's lieutenants upon earth, and sit upon God's throne, but even God by himself, they are called gods.
This mindset alienated Parliament and shocked their decades-long practice of balanced polity. Under the Tudor dynasty rulers, James I changed the authority of taxation, religion, and sovereignty to the monarch by removing the power of the representative body.
The main struggle that James I dealt with was the power of taxation. By tradition, he needed to summon Parliament and receive their consent to gather revenues from the people for the government.
The power of the purse was the trump card in this relationship between Parliament and the king, as James was severely limited in his power without funds to enforce things. His main source of income was taxing every citizen under the Church of England, which angered many people as they preferred not to participate in this mandatory religion.
One of James' most notable acts was his position on religion. He believed that as an aspiring absolute monarch, he should control the beliefs of everyone in the kingdom. He arrested anyone who did not participate or believe in the Anglican Church, whether it be an extreme Protestant or a Catholic.
There were three different types of radicals against his practices of religion: the Puritans, who wanted to purify the Church of England; the Separatists, who wanted to separate from the Church and from their own system; and the Catholics, who were previously maintained by Elizabeth I, who tried to control the controversy through the Elizabethan settlement of 1559.
The Anglican Church is corrupt and impure. It's too hierarchical. They should remove the system of archbishops and bishops appointed by the crown, as this is done to stimulate support for the king and not to make the church better and pure as it should be. Rather, the people of the church should work together and grant positions based on seniority, without any political attachments.
Required membership in the Church of England violates the biblical precepts for true Christians, and thus we must break away and form independent congregations that adhere more strictly to divine requirements. The Anglican Church is too Catholic, but King James I won't let us leave for the New World.
But the king was not fond of this newfound resistance to his authority over the church.
I will make them conform themselves, or else I will harry them out of the land, or else do worse.
This angered the Puritans and Separatists, who made up the majority of the lower house of Parliament, the House of Commons. They also served as local sheriffs and justices of the peace. It was not wise to alienate them.
At first, the king was more forgiving of the Catholics.
I will not persecute any that will be quiet and give but an outward obedience to the law.
But he soon reinforced strict penalties against Catholics.
Partly triggered by Catholics' disillusionment with the new king, a new wave of anti-Catholicism and even harsher legislation was put into place.
In an effort to end the persecution of Roman Catholics by the English government, a radical Catholic named Robert Catesby led the Gunpowder Plot of 1605, a failed attempt to blow up King James I in the upper house of Parliament, the House of Lords.
I plan to blow up the Parliament House with gunpowder. In that place have they done us all the mischief, and perchance God hath designed that place for their punishment. The nature of the disease requires so sharp a remedy.
King James I even went so far as to create a translation of the Bible in the English vernacular and labeled it as authorized.
Anyone with possession of an unauthorized Bible would immediately be arrested, even if their version was better. For example, William Tyndale had a clearer, more accurately transcribed version, but it was unauthorized, so his followers were persecuted.
After King James I passed away, his son Charles I carried on the Stuart legacy and also attempted to create an absolute monarchy. 3 years after his inauguration to the crown, Parliament submitted the Petition of Right in 1628.
Charles I had almost no choice in accepting this position because taxation was prohibited without Parliament's consent, and they withheld all tax revenue power until it was signed by the king.
However, the king later went back on his word because the petition placed limitations on his royal power, making it harder to run an absolute monarchy. From 1629 to 1640, England went through what is now called the period of personal rule. In order to maintain sole power, King Charles I didn't summon Parliament for 11 years, the longest gap in decades.
Because he couldn't obtain state revenues without Parliament, the king found a loophole. He collected ship taxes from coastal areas from trade merchants, which were always in place, but this time collected more frequently and from a wider variety of people. He claimed he needed the money for coastal defense, but rather used it for other government operations.
The charge of defense, which concerneth all men, ought to be supported by all.
This policy was not popular, as there was a great opposition from merchants and landed gentry. This added to the growing animosity for the king.
Charles I soon married a Catholic woman, added more rituals to the Anglican Church, appearing more Catholic than the Church had been since Queen Mary I of England. The Puritans were upset and felt threatened by the growing Catholic appearance in the Church. On the other hand, the King Archbishop Laud tried to enforce Anglican practice on the Presbyterian Scottish kingdom, which gave rise to a rebellion over there too. King Charles I was unable to raise troops and needed money. He was forced to call Parliament back into session after 11 years of personal rule.
At first, a short parliament was called. The members were so angry with the king for dismissing them for so long, so they were uncooperative with his demands. He dismissed them again and re-elected the entire parliament in hopes of a more cooperative representative body. When he found the results were the same, he tried to dismiss them again, but this time Parliament had enough and started a rebellion.
This parliament was in session from 1640 through 1660. They placed severe limitations on royal authority, abolished arbitrary courts and ship money tax collections, and established the Triennial Act, which required Parliament to meet at least every 3 years, with or without the king's consent.
After the limitations were established, most members of Parliament were content. However, there were a few radicals who went as far as to want the king dead. The king tried to arrest some of these radicals, which upset many members of Parliament, and thus the English Civil War began.
Members of the Long Parliament are too radical, too extreme for this country. They must be persecuted before they affect those too simple-minded to know good from wrong.
The first phase of the English Civil War lasted from 1642 to 1646, and Parliament came out victorious. They developed a new model army of Parliament supporters and extreme Protestants called Roundheads, which fought against the monarchy supporters called the Cavaliers. The first phase ended with the capture of King Charles I by a military leader, Oliver Cromwell, an extreme Protestant who believed that he was doing the work of God.
Sir, this is none other but the hand of God, and to him alone belongs the glory. You have sat too long here for any good you have been doing lately. Depart, I say, and let us be done with you. In the name of God, go.
Parliament was cut down to only the most radical and those extremely loyal to Cromwell, called Rump Parliament. This group condemned Charles I with treason and sentenced him to be beheaded, a highly uncommon occurrence at this time period.
Sweetheart, now they will cut off thy father's head. Mark, child, what I say. They will cut off my head and perhaps make thee a king. But mark what I say, you must not be a king, so long as your brothers, Charles and James, do live.
After his last words to his youngest son, Henry Stuart, King Charles I was beheaded in one clean drop of a blade. The monarchy was destroyed and the upper house of the Lords was removed. With just a remaining 53 people in the House of Commons in Oliver Cromwell's leadership, England was proclaimed a Commonwealth or Republic.
The death of King Charles I marked the end of Stuart absolutism. Eventually in 1660, Cromwell fell, and there was an overwhelming amount of support to bring Charles I's sons back to the throne, Charles II and James II. The people got sad and tired of the strict puritanical military dictatorship run by Cromwell and welcomed a monarchy back into place.